know.
Okay.
I'm checking the list here. It looks like it looks like anybody's name, so we'll be hopefully free of any ne'er-do-wells tonight. But we'll go ahead. Everything should be booting up on the restream. We're going to say hello to YouTube and hello to Facebook. And we'll be getting started here with a program on crossing the Rhine name. So we'll be okay. Double check our list here. Looks good to me. Let's start the music and let everybody in. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Greatest Generation Live for Thursday, March 27th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the Veterans Breakfast Club. It's great to see you all here this evening for a wonderful program. We are the Veterans Breakfast Club, as I mentioned. Our mission is to create communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We've been around for 16 years. And we'd like to be around for another 16. So do us a favor, check us out on our website, www.veteransbreakfastclub.org, to check out all of our upcoming events, both online and in person. As of last Saturday, we are back to our in-person breakfast coming out of the cold winter here in Pittsburgh. So looking forward to seeing some of you or all of you at upcoming in-person breakfasts, which are, I would say, like our bread and butter. We love doing them just as much as we love doing our online programs. But there's something really nice and intimate about the in-person breakfast. Glenn Flickinger is your host tonight. Glenn, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing excellent. Thanks very much, Sean. Pleasure to be back.
Absolutely, as always, definitely. And you have a great program lined up for us. Are you going to lead us in?
Yeah. 2 programs in a row for me. So I don't know if I get like hazardous duty pay or what, but especially with those bombers. So let's hope we don't have any of that again this week. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be back on a Thursday night and delving into World War II. We've been doing these sort of broad updates on the history of World War II, if you will, for the last 6 months, sort of 80th anniversary shows. We did 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge, of Hürtgen Forest before that, of Yalta, the Yalta Conference, and now it's late March 1945, 80 years ago. What was going on? Unfortunately, this event occurred on March the 7th, but we're a couple weeks late covering that. But it really truly is one of the key events of the war in Europe in the spring of 1945. And I'm really, really pleased tonight. I've got my 2 good friends and fellow World War II enthusiast, Greg Yost. Greg, say hello to everybody.
Hello, good to be here, as always.
And Colin Heaton. Colin?
Hello, all. Good to see you again.
Good. Colin, how goes your development of that movie? Give us a little update on what it's the Star of Africa, right?
Yeah, we had a producers meeting today. We're doing a script review and starting to talk to the investors and trying to put it together, hopefully to have a meeting with a very high-profile, well-known Hollywood director who might take it on board and run up the flagpole.
Great. I've always wondered how people get movies made, and once this one's made, Colin, you'll have to tell us all about it.
I could write a book about the misery of this operation.
Never understood that whole process. So it would be fascinating to hear the story, Colin, and I'm really going to be successful with this. Scott Masters, let me unmute you, Scott. Hello, Scott.
Hello.
Good to see you. You had mentioned in our exchange of emails there was a possibility of a veteran that you know being on tonight, a World War II veteran. I was wondering if that was the case, or was
he is in the Zoom room, Russell Freeberg.
Okay. could we find Russell?
I will look for him. Scott, I just made you co-host. Please feel free to share the pictures that you sent to me. My computer's running a bit slow because of the stream, so I think yours will probably go a bit faster than mine.
Okay, I can do that in a few moments. First, I'd love to say hello to Russell. Sean, if you could unmute him.
Yep,
I had the
Russell.
occasion to meet Russell along with a friend of mine, and we did an interview and developed a web page on him. And he is a 102-year-old American veteran who was involved in crossing both the Rhine and the Ruhr, and a really well-known journalist. Russell was the managing editor of the Chicago Tribune for quite a number of years after the war. He has been on Meet the Press and really has an incredibly impressive resume all around. I was very lucky to be able to speak to him, and I'm really happy that he was able to come here this evening. So, Russell, I think you're unmuted now. It's really nice to see you again.
Here I am.
Here you are, Russell. So we're very pleased to have you. Welcome to our program. You live where? In Detroit?
I'm glad to be here.
Are you in Detroit?
I am in DeLand, Florida, which is in east central Florida, about 17 miles inland from the Atlantic Ocean.
Well, I've been to Detroit many times, and I'm going to guess that where you are in Florida is a lot nicer than Detroit right now.
I do have a summer home in outside of Traverse City, Michigan, which is in northern Michigan, about 3 hours from the Canadian border, I would say.
Ergo, your association with our master Canadian history professor, Scott Masters. He is the master of the masters for us. He's a great friend of the BBC, and we've shared lots of programs with him. So tell us, unfortunately, we didn't know that you might be on until just the last couple of days. So often we would love to have you on in a program in the future where we do a sort of a full interview of your experience in World War II for, an hour or so, if you're open to that one date in the near future. Tonight we have this program on the history, basically, of crossing the Rhine, but you were part of that history. What part were you involved in?
Well, we crossed the Rhine south of Wessel, between Cologne and Wessel in Germany, and we crossed on a pontoon bridge. I was in the 8th Armored Division, 49th Infantry Company, and we crossed into an open field.
Under fire or without being fired upon?
Without being fired upon.
Do you remember?
An infantry division had crossed earlier. I don't know if they were under any fire or not, but we were not under fire.
Was that, if you know, was that part of Hodges' first U.S. Army?
9th Army.
9th Army.
General Simpson's 9th Army.
Yeah. At times.
When we reached the Rhine, we waited for about 3 days. The Brits thought they might get a bridge over at Wessel, and we waited for 3 days and then gave up on that.
Yeah. The Remagen Bridge was the only one left standing that we were able to. Yeah. And when did you enter the fight in Europe? Did you enter early on or sometime after?
No. We landed in England in November of 44 and were held in reserve. And then when the Battle of the Bulge broke out, they quickly sent us into combat. We landed in Le Havre, and even then the harbor was not ready for a ship. We still came down on cargo nets into landing craft.
And you were part of the Ninth Armored, but in an infantry battalion. Was that
Eighth Armored
I'm sorry,
Division,
8th Armored Division. I'm sorry.
49th Armored Infantry,
Armored Infantry.
Armored Infantry. We were a triangle division,
Right.
infantry, artillery.
So we're going to talk about that because it was an armored infantry unit which took the Remagen Bridge, and
Yeah, the Ninth Armored.
yeah, and it was an armored infantry battalion led by this one company led by Carl Zimmerman. But the point is, the armored infantry got to ride, whereas the regular infantry had to walk. Do I have that right?
Yes, each squad in our battalion had a armored infantry vehicle.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Half
track,
half track.
half
Yeah.
track.
Yeah. Yeah.
Each squad had a half track.
Yeah.
It was like home. Boy, you could store stuff in it. It was really nice.
Yeah. Were you a rifleman?
I was a staff sergeant and the head of a 10-man rifle division. I mean, 10-man rifle squad.
Squad. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Now, Scott, you said you had perhaps a couple of pictures of Russell during the war?
Yes, I do, and I think I am all set up to share screen here. Sorry, I haven't done this outside of my school setting too often, but let me go ahead and bring one of those up right now. And I think that this is the picture of Russell getting his Bronze Star. So that might be a great story to hear, Russell, if you want to tell that one. I know you have a lot of other program to get into, Glenn.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, please, Russell, tell us that story. Then we'll get into our program. We'll try to bring you back in the program, but we'd very much like to have a full interview of you, in the next few weeks, if that's okay with you.
That would be okay.
So tell us about these pictures and your Bronze Star, please.
Well, the Bronze Star, I captured an ACAC position outside of Cologne, I think. I just crawled up to it and stood up and said, "Kommen Sie here," and they put up their hands, uh, and I talked to them, and they had a horse and a wagon that they would like to bring in to our lines, and I said that was okay. They could do that. I don't think a lot of people understand that the German army had over 2 million horses,
Yeah.
and in lots of ways was not much different than World War One.
Right.
So they came in, and that was it. And I got a Bronze Star for that.
And this picture on the right, I take it you're on the far right of this picture, I'm guessing.
The two pictures, one is with Colonel Roseborough pinning the Bronze Star on me, and the next one was taken during a rest period, I suppose, somewhere in central Germany. And the fellow with me is Jack Christian, who was my best buddy through the war and for years beyond.
And
You can see the rations you can see why a half track is so great. You can see the rations tied to the front of the half track. And that's not my half track. They put a storage bin on top of it
Yeah.
for And you can see the jerry cans of gasoline along the side there.
Wasn't there a 50 caliber machine gun on each one of these half tracks up front?
Not on every one. Uh, my squad did have a half track with a 50 caliber on
Yeah, yeah. I'd want one if I was given a choice.
it.
Russell, did you make it to the end of the war without being wounded?
I did. One incident where I was walking with our first sergeant one day heading east, and the Germans had a nasty habit of zeroing in on crossroads. And we reached a crossroad, and sure enough, mortar shell came in. It blew me up in the air, and my helmet went off. The rifle left my hands, and I bounced against the fence. But the first sergeant was very husky and had a lot of meat on him, and he was behind me, and he took the shrapnel. So I was very lucky.
One had to be lucky to make it through that war without any incident, being injured or being wounded. So we're happy that you did. Well, Russell, I'm going to ask you just to listen in on the rest of our presentation, and here and there, particularly when we get to various parts about crossing the Rhine, we'd love any thoughts you might want to express. And then I'll be in touch through Scott to find a date when we could have you back on and focus and concentrate just on your story. We love hearing from the veterans that we can still hear from.
Okay, gotcha.
Thank you so much. And Scott, thank you for introducing Russell to us. Okay. So we're going to get started on the story of crossing the Rhine at Remagen, the bridge at Remagen. I don't know if any of you remember a old movie called The Bridge at Remagen. And if any of you can remember the star of that movie, because it just occurred to me who the star was earlier today in an email exchange. We're going to give you a free round trip to Canonsburg, Pennsylvania. All expenses paid. Anybody remember? I know not everybody's muted, but everybody's unmuted. But if you want to raise your hand, who is the star of The Bridge at Remagen, made in, I'd say, the late 50s, early 60s?
Wasn't it Robert Vaughn?
He might have been in it, but he wasn't the main.
But
Rick Arisman said William Holden.
Nope.
no.
Barb, you put up something. George Segal. George Segal.
Nope.
Richard Burton.
Going once.
Chris,
Going-
did you raise your hand? Chris Parolo? Okay, you're muted. Chris, go ahead.
No, I think it was George Siegel.
Yeah.
He might have been in it.
Perry Como.
Nope.
Ben
Cannonsburg.
Gazzara.
Ben Gazzara. Who said Ben Gazzara?
Ken Kazak.
Ken. I should have known. Should have known Ken. Ken, do you prefer the Motel 6 or the Holiday Inn in Canada? Great old movie. Some of those other names might have been in it, but I was exchanging emails with somebody today, and it just hit me that it was Ben Gazzara. What a name that has been forgotten, right? Okay, let me put up this PowerPoint and let's get started in a serious way here. Okay. And again, it was such a pleasure to have Russell step in, and we look forward to having him on in the future in much more detail. So crossing the Rhine at Remagen, right? Remagen was the first place we crossed the Rhine, as Russell said, eventually several others. I just thought this was a great picture. I couldn't resist playing, and it just tells you the history of the Remagen Bridge. You see the helmets? That's the first U.S. Army coming across the Remagen Bridge in in 1919 as the Army of Occupation of Germany. Same bridge, same towers. This time though, the U.S. had lots of horses still. So I just thought I'd show that as an entertaining point to start with. We're going to ask Greg Yost, who's contributed a great deal to this, to take the first 10 minutes or so and give us the big picture.
Yes, thank you so much. I tend to focus on the big picture, right? When we do these programs, I tend to go, there's a little bit of background. Well, this is a pretty big picture. I'm going back 4,500 years. But it's actually relevant to some of the things that Russell was even talking about just recently with his experience there. This is someone went onto Wikipedia and they took they created, Wikipedia didn't do this, but they went into every battle in human history since 4,500 years ago that has an article in Wikipedia, and they put a little dot on a map. One of my editorials is, wouldn't it be nice if this map stayed the same for the next 50 or 250 years? But we'll leave that aside for right now. We don't know, no one can say this is, who the commanders were, how many troops there were, what the people were, but we know something significant about almost every battle listed on that map. We know that one side starts the battle off with a significant and important advantage. And so my question is going to be, we won't ask this out loud, but the question is, which side has the advantage going into a battle? Does the offense have an advantage, or does the defense have an advantage? And in 80%, 90%, 97% of the battles ever in human history, the side that has the advantage starting off a battle is the defense. Defense has a certain intrinsic advantages going in, such that historically the offense is supposed to have a 3-to-2 ratio in manpower, 2-to-1, 3-to-1 to equalize the sides. You have to bring in twice as many, 3 times as many troops on the offense. A couple of interesting reasons for that, some of which we're going to get into here. But one is, and Russell actually got into in some of these, is that the defense can prepare the terrain, right? And here's a couple of things that they could prepare for. These are, the top one is troops, I think, from World War I marching across an open field. Russell said when he crossed the Rhine, he went into an open field, but there were no Germans on the other side. And of course, the enemy can hide behind the tree line way up there with machine guns or even just rifles. Pickett's charge. Even if you have some pretty heavy equipment, like half tracks or tanks, the middle frame down below shows Sherman tanks crossing a field. And over to the left of that, 2 guys with a rocket launcher. And they can maybe not take out the whole tank, but disable it by hitting in the treads if you're a good shot, right? So all that heavy equipment can be taken out or neutralized to a significant degree by just 2 guys or 1 guy with a bazooka. The far right there's a tank crawling down a road, and if you have a valley road, or as Russell mentioned, if you are zeroed in on the road with your artillery, your mortars, or what have you, all of that equipment coming down the road can be neutralized with a couple of artillery shots. One advantage defense has.
In the German case, late in the war, a 15-year-old kid with a Panzerfaust in his hands.
Fortunately, most of those Panzerfausts didn't work. Well, fortunately for US, a lot of them didn't work. Since you're going into a position, since the defense is here and the offense is coming in, you can have a fortified position, and up the top there are 2 very simple fortified positions. One's very simple, it's called a foxhole. You just dig into the ground. The other is a more structured, that's from a picture from the Siegfried line, which was some German defenses on the French-German border. Big concrete block there, right? The defense can take the high ground. The lower part there's US soldiers in Afghanistan going up a hill. Not desirable. You'd rather be on the top of the hill, right? And then on the right down below is Monte Cassino in Italy, that towering mountain that commandeered the valley, right? That the Allies were very worried about and eventually bombed out. These are some of the advantages the defense has, and I think these are pretty intuitive. I think most of the people on here would sort of recognize this. One advantage, one problem that an attacker has is if you're crossing a large body of water. And I think the top left is Iwo Jima, the top right is Normandy, but it doesn't matter. You can switch those two around. Once again, a clever defense would have those ranged out, and you would have the artillery in there. And those, pardon the terrible pun here, but those ships out there are sitting ducks coming in there. They're in plain view and they can't defend themselves. They can't really maneuver. So defense has certain advantages here. The one that we're going to talk about tonight is when you're crossing a river. If you want to go back just a slide there real quick. So
right.
the crossing of the river. And, how do you get across a river? Well, if the river's shallow enough, you can walk across, but you're also in plain view there. If you need to take some boats or some rafts, you can cruise across. Ideally, you want to set up one of these pontoon bridges or a real bridge, which is what we're going to be talking about tonight. But you have to be secure on the other side, because as you can see, those troops on the pontoon bridge are sitting ducks if there's machine guns or mortars on the other side, right? So the defense has advantages here. And we want to look at the strategic situation going into March 45. Clearly, the Allies had major advantages, both in the East and the West. The number of troops that they had and the equipment that they had. The Yalta Agreement had set up some borders where the U.S. was going to shoot for, and the Soviets were going to go for Berlin, and the Western Allies were going to cross the Rhine and to take over much of Germany. They were strategic bombing. They were sort of basically getting ready for the post-war era, preparing to send some troops to the Pacific. The Germans were in chaos. As we can see, that's maybe an overgeneralization. We can talk a little bit about Colin and a great uncle of mine who was actually in the Ninth Army with our new guest here, Russell. Get into that a little later. This is one of the last known pictures of Adolf Hitler. It's actually a movie clip, and I clipped it out. He comes out of his bunker in mid-April, six weeks after Remagen, right? 6 weeks after 6 weeks after the crossing of the Rhine, to rally the troops who are called to the defense of Berlin. This picture is one of the saddest pictures I've ever seen in my life. It disgusts me. It sickens me. I don't need to tell you the story. Just that's how desperate they were. But they shouldn't have even tried that. They should have just thrown up the white flag. But we all know that. This is how desperate they were. Now there were significant numbers of German units who were still putting up serious fights, but they were scraping the bottom of the barrel, and to send that person out. Okay, that's where the Germans were. I don't know. So on the East and the West, if you want to go to the next slide before I start to cry. Crossing of the Rhine, the Germans we talked about in the Luxembourg area there in December of 44 and into January 45 had wasted an enormous amount of their manpower, their equipment, their ammunition in the Battle of the Bulge. It just didn't go. It was an offense. It caught the U.S. by surprise, but as poorly prepared as the U.S. was, U.S. got its act together, fought the Germans back, and Germans wasted all of this. U.S. and the British and Canadians crossed the border into Germany. If you look there, you'll notice that the river, which goes basically due north-south, that's the Rhine. So a significant amount of Germany is actually west of the Rhine. The southern part there with the two green arrows had some heavily fortified areas called the Siegfried Line, which were a non-trivial obstacle. But once again, the manpower, the equipment, the ammunition, a lot of it had been wasted in the Ardennes. That crossing the Siegfried Line, the lower part of that map, would have been much more difficult had the Germans played defense instead of gambling on that stupid offense. You see the Allied armies just moving into Germany there, and they come up to this major river, the Rhine. I've never been to Europe, never been to Germany. The Rhine is not a walkable river. Several hundred yards wide most of the way. Very, it's a significant obstacle. And a smart defender would set up defenses to defend along the Rhine. And the Allies knew this, and the Germans knew this, and the Germans knew that the Allies knew this, the Allies knew the Germans knew this. So the Rhine becomes sort of the last major obstacle in the West where the Germans can mount a rational defense. That if you get your stuff together on the East Bank, you can really make it difficult for the Allies. The 2-to-1, 3-to-1 advantage might have to be 4-to-1 or 5-to-1. It's going to be extremely expensive for the Allies to cross this. The Rhine is such a big obstacle that the army actually called in the Navy to assist it in crossing it. There had been other rivers crossed in Europe and Italy where the army just did it on its own. This was a big enough deal that they brought in some Navy units. Hey, this is a big body of water. Help us cross. Get us ready. The plans were set for March 20th, 21st, 22nd. The British and Canadians up north with some U.S. airborne units as well. These all have names. I'm going to let Glenn and Colin talk about them. The southern part is where George Patton was, and he was going to get ready to cross. He was all getting all excited. And that central part there is, I think, going to be the topic of tonight's conversation, which wasn't really a major part of the U.S. plan until things fell into the lap. So that might be as good of a background. Military advantage, defense. This is the defense that the Germans could have and were mounting. This is what the Allies were getting ready for. Questions, comments?
I would just like to point out one thing, and I put these captions here. This for the Allied Army, the U.S. Army, this is the zenith of the size, combat power of the Allied armies, and particularly the U.S. Army. Okay, you can see the 2nd British Army is up here, along with the Canadian Army further north, and that's Montgomery's Army Group. The 9th U.S. Army, where Russell was included under General Simpson, had come into the line just about after the Bulge. Okay, it was not in the fight until after the Battle of the Bulge. Now Russell's unit was, but it wasn't. So his unit becomes attached to the 9th U.S. Army. The 9th U.S. Army sometimes is attached to Montgomery, sometimes it's attached to Bradley's 12th Army Group, right? 1st U.S. Army under Hodges, that's the big red one, that's the 1st Armored Division, et cetera, et cetera. Patton's well-known 3rd Army further to the south. And we forget, and it's another key part of this picture, the 7th Army and a French army are further to the south under Jacob Devers, another name that is not well known. The 7th Army, commanded by General Patch, who had come from the Pacific. We've talked about him in the past. I'm going to say in the U.S. Army here, there's about 2.5 million men, maybe 3 million men now in Europe. But in the front lines with Russell and the rest of his friends, there's maybe 1 million, probably just under 1 million men. Where are the other 1.5 million men? They're the logistical support. This is the tip of the spear, and the logistical support is backing them up. So
often called a tooth to tail ratio in the military. Your teeth, your upfront people, and the tail who sort of have to support you. Yeah.
So that's the picture on the American side. Before we jump a bit to the German side, we had paused for any questions. Any questions or comments?
Nothing I can see in the chat, and I don't see any hands raised.
Let's jump to, sorry, I jumped too fast. Colin, we've seen this guy before. He seems to be all over the place on the Western Front, causing the Allies a problem.
On the Eastern Front, too. That's why he was called Hitler's fireman.
He looks to me like the ultimate German Prussian general.
He was, I interviewed several German officers who knew him personally, and they all agreed he was an outstanding combat leader, but personally, he was a real bastard who had no problem shooting his own men.
What happened to him after the war?
He committed suicide right as the close of the war. He knew he was going to be wanted for war crimes, so he just walked off and did the deed.
Mm-hmm. Okay, but he's in command of
the 9th Army, the German 9th Army.
German 9th Army, not Army Group B. That was the Eastern.
Yeah, he was in charge of 9th Army, and then he was placed in charge of Army Group B. Then Hitler was considering putting him back on the Eastern Front, but midway between halfway to Berlin, Hitler changed his mind. He put him back in charge of Army Group B and said, okay, I need you to shore up those defenses, especially along the Rhine. And Model called a meeting of his generals and said, here's what we're going to do. And then the rest is just history.
Here's a little more detailed map of particularly the U.S. armies closing on the Rhine, right? And this is right here at Remagen, the surge that takes place by the 1st U.S. Army and the 9th Armored Division that brings them to the Rhine rather suddenly at the beginning of March of 1945. What's going on the German side of the Rhine here, Colin?
Well, really, they're trying to bolster their defenses. General Edwin Rothkirch, who was commanding 53rd Army Corps, he was given responsibility for handling the entire Remagen area defensively. Model told him, "You're going to handle this." Then he told General Otto Hitzfeld that you're going to control this area just a further to the south. And he was delegating authority on who was going to control which points and what they should do. Model was a micromanager. But what happened was Rothkirch was on the west side of the Rhine and decided, and he was, at that time, he was near Koblenz. So he thought he would strike out and try to figure out if he could reunite with any German stragglers, get them across and rally them into a defense. But he got captured. So that ended his career. And then right after that, Model appointed Hitzfeld to take over. He was commanding I believe he was the 67th Corps. Yeah, he was commanding that on March 7th. And he was told he was now responsible for the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen. Well, Hitzfeld was near Bonn, so he couldn't make it. So he ordered his adjutant, Johannes Scheller, to go take command of Remagen, assess the situation, make sure the explosives are still in place on the bridge. They'd been there since January, I think. Some of them anyway. And so he went, and when he got there, he had a problem because he took off with 3 vehicles and they encountered an American tank unit, but they didn't get observed. So they decided they would go south, refuel, and try to go around and outflank the tank unit to get back to the area. But he got there just before noon that day, which was too late to really coordinate any kind of effective defense, because when he got there, he found out that there were about 1,000 German troops there, but I believe 120 of them were Eastern volunteers, basically slave labor soldiers, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, places like that. Then he had 36 veterans who were wounded, and they just manned machine guns. And then he had the rocket battery of Luftwaffe anti-aircraft guys. There were about 20 of them. Another Luftwaffe anti-aircraft unit with 88s, about 200 men. And then he had 500 civilian Volkssturm who were absolutely worthless, and most of them didn't even have ammunition. So there was really nothing they were going to do to stop that until they brought in air support.
This picture I had up there, this is Cologne, the famous Cologne Cathedral, which survived the war. Which you can see from Allied bombing, most of Cologne is rubble. But you see what the Germans had been doing with the bridges in Cologne. And that's what they were trying to do up and down the Rhine. Greg pointed out to me that some of the bridges actually weren't blown until after Remagen. And here's a famous picture of a 9th Armored Infantry or 9th Armored Division officer, I believe. There's a significant, hillside here overlooking the banks of the Rhine, and they look down, and there it is, the Remagen Bridge. They're astonished. I know they report it back up the line of communications to the higher ups, and the higher ups are saying, "Yeah, get across it, do what you have to save that bridge." And had the Germans tried to destroy this bridge yet, Colin?
No, they hadn't tried yet. In fact, when Scheller got there, he found out that a captain named Willy Bratke was in command, and it was his job as a combat engineer to blow the bridge upon getting the orders. And Bratke was relieved. Scheller took over, But then Brautinger realized that when Scheller arrived, he was supposed to have brought a battalion of infantry with him, but he didn't because the communication machine broke down. So Bratke got he still had his standing orders that if Americans start to approach below the bridge, but he still didn't have enough explosives, so he requested more. So a coal mine near there had shipped more explosive, but he wanted about 1,300 pounds of explosive or something like that. He got half of it, and what he got was inferior grade explosive, and it was old explosive, and they wired it. There's still controversy as to whether it was bad detonators or was one of the main detonator wire cut during one of the mortar artillery attacks. No one really knows, and but they never blew the bridge, and that's when it didn't blow. That's when Hitler said, "Well, Goering, get something in there and do it."
But my understanding is that they did try to blow the bridge, and the Americans on their side of the Rhine were watching it because they were preparing to rush the bridge, and the bridge sort of lifts up a couple of feet, all this dust and so forth. They assume the bridge is gone. The dust settles, and this is a picture of the bridge shortly after the attempted destruction of the bridge.
Yeah, that was the March 7th attempt, and there wasn't enough explosive. It didn't even really structurally damage the bridge that much from the German perspective. And they just didn't. That's why Bratke needed more explosive. He'd used everything he had and said, I need more explosive. And within a few hours, they got more. They were up underneath trying to put it in. But it was to no avail. They didn't have enough of the proper explosive to get the job done. And that's when they realized that there was nothing they could do about it. That's when they had to call in the Air Force.
But it's also when the American forces in the 9th Infantry Division bring up as much firepower as they can. This is a Pershing. I think it's M26. Do I have that right? I think it's a Pershing tank.
46.
46? Okay.
Yeah.
It's a Pershing tank, not your normal Sherman tank. You can tell by the profile and the barrel, right? But they bring up this kind of firepower to begin laying fire on the other side of the bridge to try to hold whatever German forces are over there from taking more actions to destroy the bridge. Right? This is all on March the 7th. And then I found this wonderful painting of the charge of on the bridge by these incredibly brave men. And the bravest of men were the two men I'm going to show you next. They were the ones that led this charge. And the one man has a fascinating story. Lieutenant Karl Timmerman, commander of Company A, 27th Armored Infantry Battalion, Combat Command, I think A, I left off a letter there, Combat Command A, all part of the 9th Armored Division. And Karl Zimmerman, this was an understrength company because it had been fighting for weeks in the approach to the Rhine. He's given the task to lead the charge, which I showed you the painting of here, across the bridge. And the fascinating thing about Karl Timmerman is that he was born in Germany, in Frankfurt, Germany, no more than 75, 100 miles away. His father had been in the U.S. Army, a German immigrant to the States in the late 1900s, joined the U.S. Army and been sent to the Army of Occupation in 1919 with the 1st U.S. Army. And while he was there, he kind of sort of half deserted because he had all his relatives there, married a Fraulein, and they had their son, Karl Timmerman, born in 1922 in Frankfurt, Germany. They come back to the States, and Karl is, German-American, speaks fluent German, and joins the U.S. Army in 1940, I believe it was, and ends up being in this position on March the 7th, 1945. Leading this charge. And if you read some of the accounts, and I won't bore you by reading the accounts that he wrote and in a couple of famous books about the Remagen Bridge, They basically rush the bridge. There's another explosion, I believe. Do I have that right, Colin? That takes out part of this approach. And there's a big hole, but they're able to get around it. And then they rush across the bridge, led by, in front of Carl Timmerman is his one of his platoon sergeants, Alexander Drabik, who is the first man to cross the Remagen Bridge. And he leads his platoon or his squad, it's a little bit confusing as whether a squad or platoon of, I think, 8 or 9 men, so probably a squad. And they're the first across the bridge, and they run down the middle of the bridge. Carl Timmerman is coming along behind them. They run down the middle of the bridge and trying to get across, which they successfully do. And they take no casualties as they're coming across the bridge, which is amazing. Timmerman is also following behind with others, and they're pulling every wire and they can find to try to stop any further demolitions. But you think about it, they had no idea that they could have been halfway across this bridge and this thing been blown to smithereens easily.
That's true. Yeah.
Easily. So
and they knew it.
And they knew it. And they knew it. So it's an act of bravery just beyond comprehension by these men. And this is a picture of the bridge shortly after it's taken. This sign, if you can't read it very well, says "Cross the Rhine with dry feet, courtesy of the 9th Armored Division." Sort of tongue-in-cheek U.S. Army humor, right? And the troops begin to pour across, right? Picture of the bridge shortly after it was captured. So the orders go up the line to Hodges, and Hodges says, push everything you possibly can across this bridge. And over the next several days, many, many units then follow. The German reaction is ferocious. And is it led by this man, Colin?
Yeah, pretty much. General Dr. Hans Kammler. Now, this guy was as ruthless as you could be. And I thought about writing a biography about him. He's a very interesting character. Kammler was one of the architects of designing the concentration camps. I'm not talking about like the labor camps. I'm talking the death camps. And he was also the guy who constructed and organized the building of the crematoria. He organized the Zyklon B, and this guy was a total devoted Nazi. That's why he was in charge of Peenemünde and Nordhausen, which built the V2s, and Peenemünde, which tested them under Von Braun. So once the Luftwaffe failed to bring the bridge down, after the explosives failed, Hitler gave him a personal order to launch all of his V2s, which by that time were stationed in Holland and Germany on the border. He ordered him to launch all of his V2s. He had 11 of them. Actually, he had 12. One would not light. 11 launched. I think the closest one came to something like 300 feet of the bridge. And so he tried to get the V2s on there to destroy the bridge, and that didn't work. And then it was over because the Germans had no recourse after that.
They tried 262s to attack the bridge in this fascinating painting.
Yeah, well, at first they tried using Focke-Wulf 190s, Messerschmitt 109s, and Messerschmitt 410s to strafe and drop bombs on the bridge, and none of that worked. And a lot of those aircraft were shot down by American Quad 50s and other anti-aircraft fire. So then they decided to get in touch with the Lieutenant Colonel Kovalevsky, who at that time was in charge of 2 KG-51 using 262s as bombers. So he had 30 of those, and then he managed to get those in there for one run. They are all damaged to some degree. They came in for a second run, and 5 were shot down. And by that time, it was decided to bring in the Arado 234s, which were actually better bombers. And the bombers came in, and they managed to get drops close to the bridge, but they never got a strike on it.
So I'm going to take this down. Everybody take a good look at this photo, obviously in a museum of one of these planes. Um, just going to relieve us of the PowerPoint for a couple of minutes. Until 3 or 4 days ago, when we were preparing for this, Colin, I never heard of this airplane. This is a turbojet German bomber. Do I have that right?
Yeah, yeah, it was the Hitler wanted a dedicated jet bomber, and the Arado Aircraft Corporation said, "Yeah, we can build you one. We've already got an airframe." They tested it out and found that it was just as fast as the 262, but it was more stable as a bomber platform, and it was not suited to be a fighter, unlike the 262. So Hitler said, "Okay, that's my bomber," and then they began mass production. They never produced more than I think a couple of hundred of them, and I think only about 80 or to 100 were airworthy.
It's one of those tales where, the what ifs of history. What if this had been developed, 2 years earlier?
Mhm.
What a difference it might have made, I suppose, in the war.
I get that all the time from people, and I tell them I don't care if Hitler had 10,000 Messerschmitt 262s and Arados. They could they could have never produced that many. Germany did not have the production capacity. They didn't have the manpower. They didn't have the pilots.
Yeah.
You know,
What was it? For I can't remember this, but it's something like for every Tiger tank produced, they could have produced 10 other types of weapons, right? So much went into the Tiger tank that it really was a waste of resources relative
yeah,
to your resources to the best possibility.
you could have produced 4 Mark IV Panzers for one Tiger because of the use of materials. But Ferdinand Porsche, he got Albert Speer to say, "Hey, take a look at this design that I have." And Hitler loved big things. He liked big ships. He liked big tanks, and so Hitler was all on board. He says, "How much is it going to cost me?" And Porsche told him, "Well, if you give me some slave labor, I can make it real cheap." So,
Yeah.
One other thing I'll throw in on the bomber thing here is that many of these programs, the Greatest Generation Live, sort of got started last year with the air war over Germany, right? With the 8th Air Force and the Netflix special. That plane, that Arado, is nowhere near the size of a B-17 or B-24. So as fast as it would have been, its bomb load was nothing compared to the B-17 and B-24. So even if they had produced, which they couldn't have done, 5,000 of those, they would have been able to bomb Britain, but with nowhere near the level of damage that the U.S. and the British were doing to the German cities. Just as an aside. So.
yeah, they were all tactical bombers. Germany had no strategic bombers except for the Heinkel 144, which is limited production numbers, and it wasn't even really used during the war, and it didn't have the bomb load of a B-17 anyway.
So let's pause here to catch up with anything in the chat, Sean, that we should address, or anybody's questions or comments.
Someone asked earlier where the Russians were during the crossing.
At this point, they'd crossed the Oder-Neisse and they were closing in on the Silo Heights in the north, and in the south, they were already pushed through Romania and Hungary and were already pushing into Austria.
And how far would they have been from Berlin at this point? Probably less than 100 miles.
Yeah, from the Silo Heights is about 100 miles. Yeah.
Yeah, Germany's last two natural lines of defense were rivers. If you could sort of imagine the border today between Germany and Poland is actually a series of rivers, the Oder, Neisse, and that the Germans had tried to set up a defense there, and then of course in the west we're talking here. So that's yeah.
And Brad asked, I wonder who played the Russians in the movie.
Actually, the Russians weren't in that one, as I recall. Probably well, I won't say that. Okay. Other questions about the crossing
That's
of
all
the
I see. Yes, that's all I see.
Okay. So I would like to ask Russell a question. Is he still on with us?
Let me take a look. Yes, so let me ask you to unmute, Russell.
Can you hear me, Russell?
Yes, I can.
Okay. So, Russell, my question would be this. You're well to the north of the Remagen Bridge with Simpson's Ninth Army. Your units are approaching the Rhine, preparing for Operation that Montgomery had planned, Varsity, I think it was called. Well, that was the airport, Operation Plunder. So when the bridge at Remagen was captured and the American First Army began to pour across, was that news to you? Was that shared with you? The guys, in the front line. Do you remember hearing about that?
Yes, we knew that they had captured the bridge intact and were crossing.
Mm-hmm.
We knew that.
Was
We
that
had trained with the Ninth Armored in Camp Polk in Louisiana.
okay? So sort of a sister unit, if you will. Yeah. Was there a sense of elation? Was there a sense of this is really a good thing that we've been able to cross the Rhine, might make our job easier here in the north?
Oh, yeah, we thought it was great that they had taken the bridge and were establishing a bridgehead. Uh,
What was there a sense that the war wasn't going to last too much longer? Was that more of a hope than a um, uh, you know was that more hope or a real understanding that you were nearing the end of the war?
well, I think we knew we were going to win the war, but I don't recall that there was a lot of talk about the end was just months away.
Yeah. Looking back at it, it's easy to remember that it was months away,
But
but yeah.
but after we crossed the Rhine, I don't recall seeing any German soldiers on the first day.
Right.
They had pulled back quite a ways.
Okay. Well, Russell, I just wanted to try to bring you in with sort of what was happening to you at this same point in time. So thank you. We'll come back to you. Okay.
One more question in the chat. How fast was the bridgehead at Remagen expanded, miles per day?
Well, let me put the PowerPoint back up. I'm having a little bit of trouble Sean, with my PowerPoint here. I've lost my Zoom. Let me fuss with this a minute.
It's all right. Any other questions? If you'd like to raise your hand, or if you have anything in the chat, anybody?
I will say, in the interim here, speaking of the news that Russell heard, this was front page headlines in U.S. newspapers within 24, 36 hours. This was big news back in the States.
It was big news in Berlin too.
I'm guessing you're not seeing my PowerPoint right now. Is that correct?
Not right now, no.
Yeah, I have no idea what happened here, but I think now I got it. Give me another second. Okay. Now we got it. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. So let me find the right page. Okay. So somebody asked about how many troops got across. I've got a map. There you go. From March 7th to March 24th. Okay. We poured across the bridge, and about 75,000 U.S. troops created this bridgehead here across from Remagen. Okay, so it was pretty quick. We took and these troops were all mechanized, like Russell's, even his infantry battalion was mechanized. The other thing that was going on was that, the Germans were still trying to blow it up. Even as they're trying to blow it up, we've got a combat engineer battalion, maybe a couple of battalions working on repairing the bridge. The other thing they were doing was throwing pontoon bridges across the Rhine, just above and below the actual Remagen Bridge, so that eventually there are, I believe, 3 pontoon bridges across. And as Greg said, the U.S. Navy was actually there with some of their own vessels helping ferry supplies and troops across. So it was very fast and very successful. Does that answer whoever asked that?
Actually, historically, if I'm not mistaken, I believe historically it was the fastest movement of troops across water in modern warfare.
I, I,
On, on crossing a river, on a river crossing.
Yeah. And this, it's a little different today because rivers don't mean anything to us anymore militarily as a barrier because we just take helicopters and planes across them and so forth, right? But this was still a major obstacle. This is the Rhine River that stopped the Huns and the Romans from crossing one side or the other 2,000 years before. Not too much different in 1945. So here's another interesting part of the story. On March the 17th, the bridge collapses. Just big sudden bang. There's 200 combat engineers on the bridge, and it just collapses into the river. And no one really knows why it collapsed. I'm sorry, Colin, were you going to say something? No? Um, you know, it wasn't any specific explosive that the Germans, had planted. They weren't successful in getting, the V-1 rockets to hit, the bombers to hit. I believe, Colin, weren't there even some German frogmen who went down the river to try to attach explosives to the bridge?
Yeah, they were called the Kriegsmarine Sonderkommando. Their job was to try to plant explosives on the supports of the bridge, and they were not successful. And it's kind of hard. I read the reports in the archive, but there was no real explanation as to they were all killed. But we don't know if it was friendly fire or if it was Americans shooting across the bridge. But there was no success with regard to their trying to do that.
So you see this picture. These are medics waiting. You see them down here more closer to the river's edge to see what kind of casualties might come back after the collapse of the bridge. And 28 U.S. combat engineers were killed that day on the collapse of the bridge. Back to that picture I showed you earlier, that guy with the welding torch, 200 men working on that bridge to try to save it. It just collapses, they think, just out of the fatigue. If you're an engineer of any kind, I've heard them talk about this, and it collapses into the water, as you see, I think, in this rather dramatic picture here. And then further up the river, you can see the pontoon bridges that have been constructed. So even though the bridge collapsed, the troops continued to pour across the bridge.
At the time, one of the characterizations was they said that bridge had been worth its weight in gold. That's how it was described at the time.
Yes, yes. So that's March the 17th. There are 2 more river crossings that occur shortly afterwards. And that one is George Patton on March the 22nd with the Third Army crossing the Rhine. Found this picture. I'm not quite sure if it's just before or just after he's sort of soils the Rhine River. The story is he went halfway across and in a gesture of, I don't know, revenge or whatever, he peed in the Rhine River to sort of show his feelings about the Germans. It's a very Patton-esque sort of thing. You can see here now too. Whoops, I'm sorry, was there a comment?
I don't believe so. Go ahead.
This is a picture I just love. This is now A day or two later, Patton was very proud to have beaten Montgomery, who he hated, across the Rhine in the north. And I just love this picture of Winston Churchill, who everybody knows I'm a huge fan of, chomping on a cigar with a machine gun in his hand, coming just up out of the Rhine on a Amtrak of some sort. And I'm pretty sure this is, I couldn't get the, in the description, I couldn't get it, it didn't state it, but I'm sure this is Montgomery in the background.
I think that might have been on March 27th when the Ninth Army crossed.
Yes, Russell. In fact, this map here, I think, shows it up here, right? You were up here. There's Wessel you were talking about, right, Russell?
Yeah, we crossed south of Wessel.
Yeah. So Russell would have been right in here with the Ninth Army, which I'm pretty sure at that time was attached to Montgomery's army group. The Ninth Army sometimes was with Montgomery, sometimes with Bradley, or I'm sorry, with Hodges and the Bradley in the First Army under Omar Bradley's 12th Army group. But at this point, they're up here. Okay, so you can see these three main crossings that by the end of March were penetrating deep into Germany. Russell with the Ninth Army and so forth here in the north. You can see Remagen here, and you see the first U.S. Army penetrating here through Remagen in sort of central Germany. And then you see Patton's army quickly penetrating in the south.
That upper crossing with the British, Canadians, and the U.S. Ninth Army was preceded by the largest parachute airdrop of World War II. They took every possible division, U.S. 82nd, 101st. I think there was a 17th Airborne. I think the Canadians and British had airborne units, and they dropped them across the Rhine before that northernmost crossing. Is just as a aside to this whole thing, that's one of the ways that they crossed the Rhine. So
yeah, it was called Operation Varsity.
Varsity. Yeah.
Montgomery's crossing was plunder. The air part of it was Varsity. This is typical Montgomery in that, you know, the First Army and then Patton's Third Army, they sort of just crossed the Rhine as they were moving. You know, they didn't have stop and come up with a big plan. Montgomery was a huge strategic or tactical planner, and he you know took weeks to put that all together. I also believe Operation Varsity had the largest glider portion that had ever been done before. That came out in our glider airborne story a couple of weeks ago. Now, one of the things that's interesting here, this area here, help me, Colin, because you know this a lot better than I do in terms of German cities. This area here is the Ruhr. Do I have that right?
Yep.
Dusseldorf, Cologne, and right. Okay. So this is where a huge proportion of German armaments are made. There's the Ruhr River right here. The steel mills, et cetera, are all in here. And what's ends up happening is that we surround the Ruhr, right? Montgomery comes up this way. The First Army comes up this way. And by the first week or two of April, this 5th Panzer Army and other army groups, German army elements, are surrounded. Colin, do they surrender, or is it a major fight?
No, it's pretty much a surrender. I mean, there were skirmishes and battles. Manteuffel had basically told his men that there's no reason to die for a lost cause, you know, and Model, of course, knew it was over, and large groups of men just surrendered. I mean, some without orders, some just laid their weapons down. And one of the guys, some of the guys I interviewed who were Germans, one of whom was an SS corporal. He at age 16, medic, said, "Yeah, the captain came up and said, okay, I'm not going to order you to die." He said, "The Americans have food, shelter, get the hell out of here."
I think there were 150,000 to 200,000 German surrounded in the Ruhr Valley.
Russell, did your unit pick up any prisoners as you were advancing? Were any German soldiers surrendering to your unit?
Well, yeah, we captured Germans, but if we were mounted, we just sent them back, along the line, and they we didn't disarm them or anything, then they were picked up in the rear. And that was done. They were then disarmed and cataloged and all that.
So, Russell, there's two key events that occur in April, and I'd like to ask you of what you might remember of them. On April the 12th, Franklin Delano Roosevelt dies.
Yes.
How did you hear about that? What do you recall about that event?
Well, that was the same day that I captured the Ack guys.
Ah.
By that time, we were facing west. We were way ahead of the Germans.
You came around. Yeah.
And that evening, I was sitting outside of a house where we were spending the night, and the word came down that FDR had died. He was the only president. Well, I was born in 1923, so Hoover was president, and I remember something of Hoover, but FDR was really the only president I'd ever known, have ever had. So, I kind of wondered what happens now.
Yeah. So much of you young soldiers, as adults anyway, born in the 20s, never knew another president.
That's right. That's true.
Did you vote? I don't want you to tell me who you voted for, but did you vote in 1944? Were you 21? No, you weren't 21 yet.
Oh, no, I voted, I think, in
Voted?
24.
Yeah, interesting. Okay. So the other important event,
44.
the other death that occurs in April, is it April 30th? Do I have that right, Colin, that Hitler committed suicide?
April 30th, yes.
30th? Carl, do you remember hearing about Hitler's suicide and how that came to you and what you felt when you heard that?
I don't recall anything about word coming about Hitler's death.
No? Interesting.
I just don't recall anything about it.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, you were a little busy on that half track, and yeah. Okay. Well, Russell, hold on just a minute. It occurs to me, I kind of forgot about this, but we haven't taken a station break yet. Sean, should we do that now? It's 8:12.
Yeah, sure. Let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to bring up the correct slides for us here. I want to thank you all again for being with us this evening. Oh, I haven't. Sorry about this. My computer decided that it was going to bring up a separate PowerPoint here. Let me make sure I have the right one. Here it is. That's the correct one. Focus Club. And our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. We've been doing this for, I think it's 16. And we'd like to thank our sponsor, UPMC for Life. They can help you find the information you need about the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. Check them out at upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. And we like to thank them for being a primary sponsor of the VBC. We also have a survey. I'll put the link into the chat. Love to hear what you all think of the program this evening. We have a VBC magazine. This is kind of an interesting announcement. So we have this as our quarterly magazine. This is free. If you don't get it, it's because we don't have your address. So please send your address to us, and we will make sure that you get put on our mailing list so that you can get the future issues. We also have a special edition for any Vietnam veterans here. We have a special edition magazine that's going to be coming out on Saturday. because we are doing this is the last anniversary celebration of the Vietnam Veterans Day. We're doing this at the Heinz History Center here in Pittsburgh. And as you can see there, that is our special edition commemorative magazine for this event. Vietnam veterans, please let us know. We can send you out one. If anybody else would like one, they're just $5. That donation goes to our programming here at the VBC. And if you'd like to join us at this, I'm sorry, we are sold out in person, but we do have spots available online. So please go ahead and register for that. You can check that out at veteransbreakfastclub.org. And as for our upcoming programs, coming up Monday, Civilian Women in Vietnam. That'll be March 31st at 7 p.m., same Zoom channel. So please join us on Monday for that program. Back to you, Glenn.
Yeah, one other program would be next Thursday, April 3rd. I mean, we don't have a slide perhaps prepared for it, but it is going to be on the Battle of Okinawa, Part 1. We're going to do a Part 2 later in April. So we're going to jump all the way from Russell and his colleagues fighting in Europe at the same time that on April the 1st of 1945, the U.S. Army and the Marines invade Okinawa. We're going to take a little different story of this time. We've covered Okinawa several times before. Normally, we've covered it from the Marine side. Some sort of prejudice. I'm not quite sure why we do it that way all the time, Brad. I can't imagine why. No, it just seems to be we covered from the Marines. We had Eugene Sledge's son, Henry Sledge, on one time a couple of years ago. This time we're going to cover the Battle of Okinawa from the U.S. Army side, which has been maybe somewhat neglected relative to the Marine role. And I have a historian coming on by the name of Seth Parsadon, who used to be with the World War II Museum in New Orleans, and he's now with I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, the Mississippi Military Museum. So it should be really interesting next week.
Spoiler alert, the invasion of Okinawa was almost as large as the invasion of Normandy on D-Day. That's how big it was.
Yeah. And, you had to travel 3,000 miles or so to get there from. Okay, so that's next week. But before we go any further, I have just a little bit more about FDR, but I can skip that altogether in the remaining 15 minutes or so to see if there's questions or comments of our program tonight or of Russell. Let's take advantage of having a actual man who was there. Just fascinating that we're talking about crossing the Rhine and hear what are the chances that we'd actually have a veteran on who actually did it and didn't just read about it like I have.
Bob Hansen, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, maybe 15 years ago, our World War II committee had a captain from the Ninth Army. He was the first unit that went across the bridge. He, in his unit, they came up on the hillside overlooking the bridge, saw it blow up. He said, we can party. And later on, the bridge stayed. So commander says, I want you across that bridge. They sent the timbermen across, and he went with his tanks at the middle of the night. Engineers had put tape on the bridge because there were holes in the bridge.
Yeah.
And he followed, he was told by his colonel, he says, you will not be the first tank. So his sergeant went first, and he told his sergeant, I'm going to be right behind you. And they followed the tape, the engineer tape, and got across in the middle of the night and bivouacked on the other side. Scared the whole time because there wasn't enough support over there for if there was a counterattack. But the interesting thing, President Eisenhower invited the guys who were the first to cross Remagen to a dinner every year, I think up until 1955 when he had his heart attack. And this guy went several times.
Hmm.
And I forget his name, but it was an interesting story.
Yeah. Yeah. That'd have been the 9th Armored Division he was
Yeah,
with.
9th Armored Division. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I really believe the whole story of the Battle of Remagen is undertold, underappreciated these days. And what those first men did, led by Second Lieutenant Carl Zimmerman and his sergeant crossing that bridge under fire, not knowing if it was going to be blown up or not, is just, I think, a story which is need to be retold, and I'm glad we got to tell it tonight. Thank you, Bob. Other comments or questions?
I got a question, Glenn, that I can ask Russell, because it's a really good story he told me about very shortly after he crossed the Rhine. Russell, there was a great story where you went into a German house and you were exploring a desk and found a postcard. I think that's a story people would like to hear.
Well, we had our line in the woods, and then there was an open field, and we crossed the field and got into the town, and I don't remember the name of the town. And we came under artillery fire, so we scattered into the homes. And the home I was in, after the artillery barrage stopped, and I was waiting for the all clear to move forward again, I sat down at a desk in the house and started fiddling with things on the desk, and suddenly this postcard was in my hand, and it said, "Greetings from Camp Ellis, Illinois." Camp Ellis, Illinois was about 20 miles from my home in Galesburg, Illinois. So there I was in his home, and he was a prisoner of war at Camp Ellis in Illinois.
Wow.
My regret in later years was that I did not take the name down that was on the postcard. And I could have contacted him in later years. But I did not do that. And the card was either to his wife or to his mother, and he said he was well and was taken care of, and that one of his duties was cleaning up the landscape in the camp.
Interesting.
He was probably from the Africa Corps.
Wow. Taken prisoner in North Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The American, there were about 425,000 German soldiers transferred to the United States during the war.
Yeah. Yeah, we've done a lot of programs on POWs, American POWs in Germany, mostly from the 8th Air Force or the Air Forces, U.S. Army. But we also have done a couple of programs, Russell, lately on a German prisoner of war camp here in Pennsylvania. And then we just did a screening of a documentary about Italian POWs from North Africa that came to a camp in Pennsylvania. So the whole prisoner of war story in World War II is another fascinating aspect of the war. And those men, many of them, especially those held by the Japanese, but they suffered dramatically.
Yes, they did.
Russell, if I could ask you, unless anybody else has a question.
Brad asked if Russell's been back to Germany where he fought.
Pardon me?
Russell, have you been back to Germany where you fought?
Yes, I have. In 2002, I believe, my wife and a daughter and a son spent 3 weeks driving around Europe, and we did follow at times the same route that the 8th Armored Division took across Germany. I have an interesting story that I'll tell you at some other time.
Okay. What did that bring back?
Pardon me?
Did that trip when you were, back in Germany in 2002, did that bring back good memories, bad memories, or anything around that?
Well, I think good memories since I came through the war with no injuries. Uh, we uh, we went into the line with the 9th Armored actually in Holland after we had been in the 3rd Army at the time of the Battle of the Bulge.
Okay.
I was going to mention that Bob Gorowski of NBC News and I wrote a book titled Oil and War, which explains the role of oil in World War II and how important oil was to us and how the shortage of oil in Germany was to them.
Oil in War. Okay.
Yeah, it was published by William Morrow and Company.
We'll look that up for the next time we have you here. Scott, I understand you became a journalist after the war.
I did. That's why Bob Gorowski was a good friend of mine.
And were you a specific type of journalist or general? Were you a newspaper journalist?
Well, I did financial writing for a while. I did neighborhood writing in the beginning, police reporting. I was in Washington for 10 years and became bureau chief of the Tribune Bureau in Washington. At that time, we had 11 correspondents in Washington. So I covered the White House, I covered politics. I had quite an extensive career in covering different things.
Wow, that's quite a post-war career. Little different journalistic world today that we live in than
Yeah,
you
it was.
worked in.
Mike Brosig has a question.
Yes, sir. Really, I just wanted to give you just a tidbit of information here. It does lead up to, it was about my father. I'm sorry I joined the call late, but I just got word that you guys were having this talk about the Remagen Bridge War. And actually, I just pulled this out. If I can read you 2 sentences here about my father, Bernie Brosick. He was in the 634th Automatic Weapons Battalion, the 1st Infantry Division. And in World War II, he served overseas as an anti-aircraft gunner. He landed on the beaches of Normandy on day 1 of that battle. Then he went on to fight as a member of the 106th Division, which got shredded, and they received a citation for their action at the Battle of the Bulge in Belgium in December of 44. Then he fought at the Remagen Bridge in Germany in March of 1945. And after that, he was transferred to the 3rd Army to push across Germany. And then when the war ended, of course, he was transferred back to the USA. Yeah, I'm very appreciative of his service and what all he did. He made us proud. I was a veteran that served during the Vietnam War, but I was in the Air Force stationed in Turkey for 44 months, where my 2 oldest boys were born. But that's a different thing. But again, I appreciate what you guys are doing in honoring the veterans. And again, I just wanted to mention my father in that because I know he played a serious role in those battles as well. So, but I do appreciate what you're doing in honoring the veterans. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. That's part of our mission, is to keep these stories alive and pass them on to future generations, so they appreciate where all this came from that we have. Thank you.
Sure.
Hope to see you again, Mike. Is this your first time joining us?
Yes, it is. I didn't know of these before. I don't know if you know Bob Eyer, E-Y-E-R. He's a
Yes.
World War II veteran, and I know he's very active in the veterans activities and recognition for veterans, that type of thing. And so he's the one that did send me an email. Until I got home tonight, it was about 8 o'clock. And so I joined this call at about 8:08. So I apologize for signing on late. I know I missed a good portion of it.
No worries. You're welcome. Anytime, Mike. I'm going to put my email into the chat. Please feel free to send us some information. We'd love to let you know about our upcoming schedule, and we'd hope to see you again.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. I
Yep.
appreciate that.
Please find us for more programs. We appreciate your comments.
Okay.
Well, we have reached the witching hour. Colin or Greg, any summation any of you would like to make about the crossing of the Rhine and our veterans experience that you heard about tonight?
I think it's great that we have him on. We're losing them faster than logic. I mean, we need to hold them as national treasures, and just collect every word they have to say.
Yes. Yes.
What a great coincidence that, I can study this from the academic side and get all the maps out and everything like that. But literally 2 people here can contribute firsthand stories, one vicariously and the other immediately. And that's what it's all about. That's what we need to hear. Thanks so much.
Yep. Russell, thank you so very much. Scott, thank you so very much for bringing Russell on. And Russell, through Scott, we will be in touch with you and arrange to have you come on again and tell more of your story.
Okay.
Well, I think we are done, unless anybody would like to bring up any other point or comment.
One last question. Were arrowhead devices awarded to any units that participated in the Rhine River assault crossings?
Say that again. Arrowhead?
Arrowhead devices?
I'm not even sure what. Anybody know what that is? I'm not sure. Perhaps arrowhead patches, or
No, there were devices that went on the ribbons, kind of like an oak leaf for a second award and things like that.
For crossing the Rhine, sort of a campaign ribbon, if you will. Okay.
It was Robert Brown. Robert, you did raise your hand. I tried to see if you can unmute. Robert, we can't get your mic going. There we go. Can you hear us, Robert?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
The arrowhead device is a miniature bronze arrowhead that may be worn on campaign, expedition, and service medals and ribbons to denote participation in amphibious assault landing, combat parachute jump, helicopter assault landing, or combat glider landing by a service member of the United States Army, Air Force, etc. So it was so maybe amphibious assault would be under the that criteria.
Crossing of the Rhine.
Yes.
Yeah, I know zero about that, Robert. I'm sorry. That's
Oh, okay. I thought maybe Colin would know.
Yeah, he knows most. So
Well, arrowhead devices were sort of, like a subsequent unit award, really. I mean, guys who participated would get recognized by having the device. And that's just, it wasn't a separate award. It was kind of like an attachment to a campaign medal.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, everyone, thank you all for the program this evening. We will see you hopefully Saturday online or in person, Heinz History Center, for our Vietnam Veterans Day celebration. And we will also see you Monday night for our next program.
And Thursday night for the Battle of Okinawa.
Big week's coming up. So hopefully talk to you all very soon. Thank you again for joining us.
Thank you all.
Thank you.